October 14th, 1944. A single farmhouse sits in the rolling countryside near Aachen, Germany. The morning fog clings to the valley floor like smoke from a dying fire. Inside that farmhouse, Private Danny Morrison sleeps fitfully on a straw mattress, his M1 Garand propped against the wall beside him. 19 years old with barely 6 months of training at Fort Benning before shipping out to Europe. The kid from rural Kansas who had never seen combat, never fired a shot in anger, never watched friends die in the mud of foreign soil. In 3 hours he would violate every tactical doctrine the army had drilled into his head. In 3 hours he would prove that sometimes the manual gets you killed while breaking the rules keeps you alive. But first, the German tanks had to come down that hill. Morrison had been assigned to 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon, Easy Company of the 16th Infantry Regiment. Standard infantry unit, standard equipment, standard training that emphasized following orders without question. The Army's tactical manuals were written by officers who understood warfare through maps and mathematics, men who believed that proper doctrine applied with military precision would overcome any battlefield challenge. Morrison carried those manuals in his pack along with his ammunition, field rations, and letters from home. He had memorized every procedure, studied every approved technique, absorbed every lesson that Fort Benning's instructors had considered essential for infantry survival in European combat. The farmhouse occupied strategic ground overlooking the Stolberg Corridor, a natural avenue of approach that German forces needed to control if they hoped to counterattack American positions around Aachen. Intelligence reports suggested enemy armor might probe this sector, but 3rd Squad's mission was straightforward. Observe and report enemy movement, then withdraw according to established procedures if German forces appeared in strength. The manual was explicit about infantry limitations against armoured units. Individual soldiers armed with rifles and hand grenades possessed no capability to engage tanks effectively. When armour appeared, infantry withdrew to positions where supporting weapons could engage the enemy with appropriate firepower. Morrison understood the doctrine, had practiced the procedures, believed in the system that had transformed American civilians into the most powerful army in history. But doctrine was written for normal circumstances, and nothing about October 14th would prove normal. The radio crackled to life at 0847 hours with static-filled transmissions that painted an increasingly desperate picture of German counterattack preparations. Panzer units were massing east of Stolberg, preparing to assault American positions with concentrated armour that could punch through defensive lines and reach the Rhine before Allied forces could establish blocking positions. Sergeant Williams gathered 3rd Squad around the farmhouse kitchen table, his weathered face showing the strain of commanding teenagers in situations that demanded veteran experience. 23 years old, with 18 months of combat across North Africa and Italy, he possessed the kind of battlefield knowledge that couldn't be taught in training camps or learned from tactical manuals. His instructions were precise and unambiguous. German armour was coming down the valley road within hours. 3rd Squad would maintain observation until enemy forces approached within 800 yards, then withdraw immediately to secondary positions where supporting weapons could engage the threat with appropriate firepower. Morrison listened carefully, understanding that his survival depended on following orders exactly as specified. The Army's tactical doctrine had been tested across multiple theatres of war, refined through bitter experience that had cost thousands of lives before emerging as proven procedures for infantry survival under combat conditions. Individual heroics got soldiers killed, while disciplined adherence to established tactics kept units effective and personnel alive. Every training manual emphasized this fundamental principle. Trust the system, follow the procedures, maintain unit cohesion through disciplined execution of approved techniques. But as morning gave way to afternoon, Morrison found himself studying the terrain with growing unease that transcended doctrinal certainty. The valley road that German armour would use approached the farmhouse through a natural bottleneck where steep hills on both sides created a corridor barely 200 yards wide. Ancient stone walls lined the roadway, remnants of centuries-old farming that had divided fields into geometric patterns. Dense hedgerows bordered the walls, creating natural concealment that infantry could exploit if someone possessed the tactical imagination to see opportunity rather than obstacles. The manual said nothing about exploiting terrain features that weren't specifically designated as defensive positions. Doctrine emphasized withdrawal to prepared positions where supporting weapons could engage threats with appropriate firepower, not improvised tactics that relied on individual initiative rather than coordinated unit action. Morrison's training had been thorough and consistent. Follow established procedures, maintain communication with higher headquarters, execute approved techniques that had been proven effective through systematic military analysis. By 1300 hours, German artillery began ranging shots into the valley, probing American positions with precision that suggested detailed reconnaissance and careful preparation. The shells fell in measured patterns that spoke of professional military competence rather than random harassment. These weren't desperate attacks by demoralized garrison troops, but carefully planned operations by experienced units that understood how to coordinate armor and artillery in combined arms assaults that had proven devastatingly effective across European battlefields. Morrison checked his equipment with methodical precision that his training had made automatic. M1 Garand with full clip, 2 bandoliers of additional ammunition, 4 fragmentation grenades, bayonet, field dressing, compass, and map case containing tactical charts that showed approved withdrawal routes to secondary defensive positions. Everything according to regulation, everything prepared according to doctrine that had been written by officers who understood warfare through systematic analysis of successful operations. The sound reached them first, carried on the autumn wind like distant thunder that grew steadily louder with mechanical persistence. Tank engines labouring up the eastern slope, transmissions whining under load, steel tracks grinding against stone and earth with the distinctive sound that every infantry soldier learned to recognise and fear. Morrison felt his stomach tighten with anticipation mixed with terror, understanding that theoretical knowledge was about to be tested against reality that cared nothing for training manuals or approved procedures. Sergeant Williams appeared beside him with binoculars trained on the eastern ridge, counting shapes that emerged from morning haze like mechanical predators stalking prey. 4 Panzer IV tanks followed by 2 self-propelled guns, moving with tactical precision that demonstrated professional competence and operational experience. German units that had fought across Russia and France, veterans who understood how to coordinate armour and infantry in combined operations that had proven successful against opponents equipped with superior numbers but inferior tactical integration. The tactical situation was developing exactly as Doctrine predicted, creating circumstances where established procedures offered the best chance for survival and mission accomplishment. German armour approaching in strength, American infantry occupying observation positions without capability to engage tanks effectively, supporting weapons positioned at secondary locations where they could provide covering fire during withdrawal operations. Everything according to plan, everything proceeding according to tactical manuals that had been written through careful analysis of successful operations. But Morrison's eyes remained fixed on that narrow valley road, studying terrain features that seemed to whisper possibilities that Doctrine had never considered. Stone walls that could provide cover, hedgerows that offered concealment, natural choke points where mobility became liability rather than advantage. His mind began calculating angles and distances, considering approaches that violated every tactical principle he had been taught, while offering opportunities that no manual had ever described. The 1st Panzer crested the ridge at 14:15 hours, its angular silhouette unmistakable against the grey October sky. 43 tons of German armour beginning its descent toward American positions, followed by 3 identical vehicles that moved with mechanical confidence across terrain that seemed designed for armoured operations. Morrison watched through field glasses as the lead tank navigated the winding road that would bring it within 800 yards of 3rd Squad's position within 20 minutes. Withdrawal time was approaching rapidly, creating decision points that would determine whether doctrine or innovation would shape the next 3 hours of warfare in this forgotten corner of Germany. The radio crackled with Sergeant Williams' voice cutting through static and engine noise. 3rd Squad, prepare for immediate withdrawal to secondary positions. German armour now within engagement range. Morrison's finger hovered over the radio transmit button, standard acknowledgement forming in his throat according to communication procedures drilled into every infantry soldier. But something held him back, some instinctive calculation that transcended doctrinal certainty. The lead Panzer had descended halfway down the valley road, its commander's cupola rotating slowly as the crew searched for American positions. Behind it, 3 more tanks followed in tactical formation with intervals that demonstrated professional spacing. The self-propelled guns remained on the ridge, their long barrels elevated to provide fire support during the advance. Textbook combined arms coordination that would sweep American infantry from prepared positions through concentrated firepower and armoured assault. Morrison studied the approaching formation with growing conviction that Doctrine was about to fail catastrophically. The narrow valley road channeled German armour into a single file advance where individual vehicles couldn't support each other effectively. Stone walls created artificial boundaries that restricted manoeuvre options, while hedgerows limited visibility for tank commanders who needed clear sight lines to coordinate mutual support. The terrain that Doctrine considered unsuitable for infantry operations against armour might actually favour individual soldiers who possessed tactical imagination and complete disregard for approved procedures. Morrison, acknowledge withdrawal order. Williams's voice carried the edge of command authority that brooked no hesitation or individual interpretation. 23 years old with combat experience that had taught him to trust proven tactics over improvised solutions that got soldiers killed through amateur tactical innovation. But Morrison was calculating distances and angles with mathematical precision that surprised him. The lead tank would pass within 30 yards of the stone wall, where ancient farming had created perfect concealment for infantry operations. German tank crews possessed limited visibility through armour vision blocks, creating blind spots that individual soldiers could exploit if they understood how to approach armoured vehicles without being detected. His training had emphasised tank limitations as much as capabilities, teaching recognition of vulnerabilities that infantry could exploit under specific circumstances. The first fragmentation grenade was already in his hand before conscious decision had been made. Morrison slipped through the farmhouse rear door with movements that seemed guided by instincts he hadn't known he possessed. His approach to the stone wall used every piece of available cover, moving from shadow to shadow like his grandfather had taught him while hunting white-tailed deer in Kansas woodlands that demanded patience and tactical awareness rather than aggressive pursuit. The lead Panzer's engine noise masked his movement as Morrison reached the wall that bordered the valley road. Through gaps in the ancient stonework, he could see the tank's left track assembly grinding past at walking speed, the crew inside completely unaware that American infantry had positioned itself within grenade range. German doctrine emphasized speed and firepower coordination, but assumed that individual enemy soldiers would withdraw according to predictable patterns rather than engaging armor with weapons that conventional wisdom considered inadequate. Morrison pulled the grenade pin with steady hands that belonged to someone far more experienced than a 19-year-old farm kid with 6 months of military training. The 4-second fuse began counting down time that would determine whether tactical innovation could succeed where doctrine predicted only failure. Through the tank's vision ports, he could see German crew members focused on terrain ahead, searching for American positions that intelligence reports had placed at specific coordinates, rather than considering threats from directions that tactical manuals dismissed as impossible. The explosion against the Panzer's rear deck created mechanical chaos that transformed coordinated advance into confused reaction. Track damage immobilized the lead vehicle while smoke and debris obscured visibility for following tanks that suddenly found their advance blocked by disabled armour in a terrain corridor that offered no manoeuvring room. German radio traffic erupted in urgent transmissions as tank commanders attempted to understand how American infantry had achieved tactical surprise against armoured units that doctrine considered immune to individual soldier attacks. Morrison was already moving to his second position, using stone walls and hedgerows exactly as his Kansas hunting experience had taught him to approach wary game that possessed superior senses and defensive capabilities. The second Panzer had stopped behind the disabled lead vehicle, its turret traversing frantically as the crews searched for threats that seemed to materialize from terrain features they had dismissed as tactically insignificant. German training emphasized coordinated operations against predictable enemy responses, not individual actions that violated conventional tactical logic. The second grenade found its target against the tank's engine compartment, creating mechanical failures that immobilized another vehicle while filling the narrow valley with smoke that reduced visibility to yards rather than the hundreds of meters that armored operations required for effective coordination. Morrison's tactical instincts were operating beyond conscious thought now, guided by battlefield awareness that seemed to emerge from some deeper understanding of warfare that transcended academic military theory. Radio communications between German units revealed growing confusion as tank commanders reported contact with American forces that couldn't be located through conventional observation techniques. The self-propelled guns on the ridge possessed firepower to devastate infantry positions, but required target coordinates that smoke and terrain concealment made impossible to determine. German doctrine assumed that enemy infantry would occupy prepared positions that could be engaged through concentrated artillery bombardment, not individuals who moved continuously through terrain that offered unlimited concealment options. Morrison's third attack targeted the lead self-propelled gun that had descended from the ridge to provide direct fire support against American positions that its crew couldn't locate. The approach required crossing 30 yards of open ground under potential observation from multiple German vehicles, movement that Doctrine would have classified as tactical suicide for individual infantry soldiers armed with weapons inadequate for engaging armour. But smoke from disabled vehicles provided concealment, while German crew confusion created opportunities that tactical manuals had never anticipated. The fragmentation grenade detonated against the self-propelled gun's thin side armour, creating casualties among the crew while disabling optical equipment essential for accurate fire direction. German units that had begun the advance with overwhelming firepower superiority now found themselves blind and confused in terrain that favoured defenders who understood how to exploit environmental advantages rather than relying on equipment superiority alone. By 1500 hours, Morrison had single-handedly immobilized 3 German armoured vehicles while creating tactical confusion that paralysed an entire armoured formation. Radio intercepts revealed German commanders requesting immediate infantry support to clear American positions that seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The narrow valley that Doctrine had considered unsuitable for infantry operations against armour had become a killing ground where individual tactical innovation was proving more effective than coordinated unit operations executed according to approved procedures. German reinforcement efforts were hampered by terrain constraints that prevented effective deployment of additional armour, while smoke and concealment made target identification impossible for supporting weapons that possessed firepower to destroy American positions if they could be located. Morrison continued moving between positions that existed only in his tactical imagination, using every piece of available cover to maintain pressure against enemy forces that found themselves unable to coordinate effective responses against threats they couldn't see or predict. The psychological impact on German units exceeded the physical damage to equipment, as professional soldiers discovered that their tactical training was inadequate against individual opponents who refused to fight according to predictable patterns. Tank crews that had operated successfully against conventional forces across multiple theatres found themselves paralysed by uncertainty about enemy capabilities and intentions that seemed to violate every tactical principle they had learned through combat experience. Morrison's ammunition supply was dwindling, but German confusion was multiplying with each passing minute as unit commanders attempted to coordinate responses against threats that seemed to emerge from terrain features they had dismissed as tactically insignificant. The valley road that should have provided rapid approach to American positions had become an obstacle course where disabled vehicles blocked movements, while concealed defenders maintained pressure that prevented effective reorganization or withdrawal. The second self-propelled gun attempted to reverse position, its crew desperate to escape the killing ground that the narrow valley had become. Morrison tracked its movement through gaps in the hedgerow, calculating the timing required to reach striking distance before the vehicle could gain sufficient speed to escape effective grenade range. The German crew possessed superior firepower and armour protection, but their tactical doctrine assumed predictable enemy behaviour rather than individual soldiers who adapted continuously to changing battlefield conditions. His fourth grenade caught the retreating vehicle as it negotiated the sharp curve where the valley road bent around an outcropping of limestone that had stood unchanged since medieval times. The explosion against the rear deck created mechanical failures that sent the self-propelled gun sliding sideways into the ancient stone wall with grinding metal impact that could be heard across the entire valley. German radio communications erupted in frantic calls for immediate support as unit commanders realized their armored formation was being systematically destroyed by forces they couldn't locate or effectively engage. Morrison slipped back through the hedgerow with movements that seemed guided by instincts developed through years of hunting in Kansas wheat fields, where patience and tactical awareness mattered more than aggressive pursuit. The German infantry that Doctrine demanded for clearing American positions hadn't materialized, leaving tank crews isolated in vehicles that had become steel coffins rather than mobile weapons platforms. Their training emphasized coordinated operations supported by combined arms integration, not individual survival against opponents who refused to fight according to predictable patterns. The remaining functional Panzer began traversing its main gun towards suspected American positions, the 75mm cannon seeking targets that existed only in the crew's imagination. German gunnery procedures required visual confirmation before engagement, but smoke and terrain concealment made accurate target identification impossible, while wasting precious ammunition on suspected positions rather than confirmed enemy locations. Morrison watched the turret rotation through field glasses, understanding that desperate firing revealed crew panic rather than tactical confidence. Radio intercepts indicated German commanders were requesting immediate artillery bombardment of the entire valley, accepting the risk of friendly fire casualties rather than allowing American forces to continue destroying armoured units with apparent impunity. But artillery coordination required precise target coordinates that forward observers couldn't provide from positions where visibility was measured in yards rather than the hundreds of meters necessary for effective fire direction. German doctrine assumed that enemy positions could be located through conventional reconnaissance techniques rather than individuals who moved continuously through terrain that offered unlimited concealment options. Morrison's tactical situation was becoming increasingly desperate as his ammunition supply approached exhaustion, while German reinforcements would inevitably arrive within hours. Individual soldiers armed with hand grenades possessed limited sustainability against armoured units that could call upon unlimited support once initial confusion was resolved through proper command coordination. His success depended entirely on maintaining psychological pressure that prevented German forces from organising effective responses to threats they couldn't understand or predict. The fifth grenade targeted the command tank whose radio antenna marked it as the formation's coordination centre. German unit effectiveness depended on communication links that allowed individual vehicles to operate as coordinated elements rather than isolated platforms vulnerable to individual attack. Morrison's approach required crossing 15 yards of open ground where tank crew observation could prove instantly fatal, but German confusion provided opportunities that might not exist once professional discipline reasserted itself over battlefield panic. The explosion against the command tank's turret ring created mechanical damage that jammed the main gun while destroying communication equipment essential for coordinating unit responses. German radio traffic dissolved into individual vehicle reports that revealed growing desperation as tank commanders found themselves isolated without higher headquarters guidance in tactical situations their training had never anticipated. Professional soldiers were discovering that doctrine written for conventional operations provided no guidance for responding to individual opponents who violated every tactical principle through successful implementation. By 1530 hours, Morrison had immobilized or damaged 5 German armoured vehicles, while creating tactical paralysis that extended far beyond physical destruction of equipment. The narrow valley that should have provided rapid German advance toward American positions had become a demonstration of how individual tactical innovation could overcome superior firepower through exploitation of terrain advantages that conventional wisdom had dismissed as insignificant. German units trained for coordinated operations found themselves unable to function effectively when isolated from supporting elements by individual actions that doctrine had never considered possible. The psychological impact on remaining German crews exceeded any physical damage, as professional soldiers realized their tactical superiority was meaningless against opponents who refused to fight according to predictable patterns. Tank commanders who had operated successfully across multiple theatres discovered that their combat experience was inadequate against individual soldiers who adapted continuously rather than following established procedures that could be anticipated and countered through conventional military responses. Morrison's final grenade targeted the last functional Panzer as it attempted to withdraw from the killing ground that the valley had become. The crew possessed sufficient firepower to destroy any American position they could locate, but smoke and concealment made target identification impossible, while individual harassment prevented effective coordination with supporting elements. German training emphasized unit cohesion and mutual support, principles that became liabilities when facing opponents who operated individually rather than as predictable formations. The explosion against the tank's drive sprocket created track damage that immobilized the vehicle while filling the narrow valley with additional smoke that reduced visibility to arm's length rather than the clear sightlines that armoured operations required for effective coordination. German radio communications revealed complete tactical breakdown as unit commanders attempted to understand how American infantry had achieved decisive superiority against forces that possessed overwhelming firepower advantages, according to conventional military analysis. 3 hours after the German advance had begun, Morrison found himself in control of tactical ground that Doctrine insisted should have been overrun within minutes by properly coordinated armoured assault. 6 German vehicles lay disabled or destroyed in a valley corridor that had become a monument to individual tactical innovation over institutional military wisdom. His violation of every approved procedure had achieved results that conventional operations might have required battalion-level coordination and supporting weapons that weren't available to isolated infantry units operating without higher headquarters guidance. The silence that settled over the valley carried weight that transcended immediate tactical success, as Morrison realized his unauthorized actions had implications extending far beyond individual survival or mission accomplishment. German reinforcement attempts were being delayed by tactical confusion that prevented effective assessment of American capabilities and intentions. Intelligence reports would describe enemy forces that seemed to possess capabilities and coordination that existed only in the imagination of commanders trying to explain inexplicable battlefield results through conventional military analysis. Radio transmissions from higher headquarters revealed growing American awareness that something unprecedented had occurred in the Stolberg sector. Unit commanders were requesting detailed reports about enemy contact that seemed to violate every tactical principle while achieving results that conventional wisdom insisted were impossible for individual soldiers armed with standard infantry weapons. Morrison's success was creating strategic confusion that extended far beyond the narrow valley where his tactical innovation had proven more effective than institutional military doctrine. The approaching sound of German reinforcement vehicles meant that his individual tactical advantage was temporary rather than permanent, dependent on maintaining confusion and concealment rather than sustained combat capability against coordinated enemy responses. But 3 hours of successful resistance had demonstrated that individual soldiers who understood how to exploit terrain advantages could achieve tactical results that transcended theoretical limitations imposed by equipment disparities and doctrinal assumptions about infantry capabilities against armoured units. Morrison prepared for withdrawal to secondary positions where supporting weapons could provide coordinated defence against German reinforcements that would inevitably restore conventional tactical balance through superior firepower and numerical advantage. His unauthorized tactics had bought precious time for American forces to organize proper defensive responses, while proving that battlefield innovation could succeed where institutional wisdom predicted only failure through individual initiative that transcended approved procedures and established military doctrine. The German reinforcements announced themselves with the distinctive rumble of half-tracks grinding up the eastern approach road, their diesel engines laboring under the weight of infantry squads trained specifically for clearing American positions that had proven too stubborn for armour alone. Morrison counted 8 vehicles through his field glasses, each carrying a full section of veteran troops who understood urban warfare and close-quarters combat better than the tank crews he had been terrorizing for the past 3 hours. These weren't garrison soldiers or hastily assembled reserves, but professional infantry with combat experience across Russia and Italy, who knew how to coordinate with armor in combined operations that had proven devastatingly effective against Allied positions. The tactical situation was shifting rapidly from individual innovation against confused armor crews to conventional infantry engagement, where German numerical superiority and professional training would reassert doctrinal advantages that Morrison's improvised tactics couldn't overcome indefinitely. His grenade supply was exhausted, leaving him with rifle ammunition and bayonet against forces equipped with automatic weapons, mortars, and tactical coordination that would systematically eliminate American positions through proven techniques refined across multiple theatres of warfare. Sergeant Williams's voice crackled through the radio with urgent transmission that carried the authority of someone who understood when tactical withdrawal became survival necessity rather than doctrinal preference. Morrison, German infantry deploying for systematic clearance operations. Your position is about to become untenable. Immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Bravo, where supporting weapons can provide covering fire during extraction. The communication protocols were standard, the tactical assessment accurate, but Morrison found himself studying terrain features that seemed to whisper possibilities his training had never considered. The stone farmhouse that had served as observation post possessed structural characteristics that could be exploited for defensive operations if someone understood how medieval construction techniques had created tactical advantages that modern military engineering had largely abandoned. Thick walls built from local limestone provided protection against small arms fire, while narrow windows created natural firing ports that limited exposure while maintaining observation of approaches. The building's position on slightly elevated ground offered commanding views of valley approaches while presenting minimal target profile to enemy forces advancing from lower terrain. German infantry deployment followed textbook procedures as half-tracks discharged their human cargo at tactical intervals that prevented concentrated American fire from achieving maximum casualty effect. Squad leaders positioned automatic weapons to provide covering fire, while riflemen advanced through terrain features that offered concealment and protection during approach movements. Professional military competence was evident in every movement, as veteran soldiers implemented tactics that had proven successful against defensive positions across European battlefields. Morrison's tactical analysis operated beyond conscious thought now, guided by battlefield awareness that seemed to emerge from survival instincts rather than academic military theory. The approaching German squads were following predictable advancement patterns that created opportunities for individual soldiers who understood how to exploit timing and terrain, rather than relying on firepower superiority or numerical advantage. His Kansas hunting experience had taught patience and tactical awareness that transcended formal military training, while developing instincts for reading terrain and predicting movement patterns. The 1st German squad approached within rifle range at 15:47 hours, their advance covered by automatic weapons positioned on the ridge where disabled tanks provided improvised fighting positions. Morrison's M1 Garand possessed 8-round capacity with sufficient accuracy for engaging individual targets at ranges where German submachine guns remained ineffective. The tactical mathematics were brutally simple. Each shot had to count because reload time would provide German infantry with opportunities to advance under covering fire while closing distance to ranges where their automatic weapons achieved decisive advantage. His first shot caught the German squad leader as the veteran sergeant attempted to coordinate fire and movement between his riflemen and supporting machine gun positions. The 30-006 round struck with authority that spoke of American industrial precision applied to military requirements, dropping the experienced soldier who had been directing tactical coordination essential for effective small unit operations. German squad cohesion wavered momentarily, as remaining soldiers attempted to understand how American resistance had achieved such precise target engagement from concealed positions. Morrison was already moving to his alternate firing position when German return fire began chipping limestone fragments from walls, where he had been positioned seconds earlier. The farmhouse's medieval construction provided multiple firing ports that allowed continuous engagement from different positions while maintaining protection against counter-battery fire that could prove devastating against stationary defensive positions. His movement between firing points created tactical confusion as German infantry attempted to coordinate responses against defenders who seemed to possess supernatural ability to appear and disappear at will. The second shot eliminated the German machine gunner whose automatic weapon had been providing covering fire for squad advancement. Precise marksmanship, combined with tactical mobility, was proving more effective than static defensive positions that allowed enemy forces to coordinate systematic approaches using proven techniques for overcoming resistance through firepower concentration and coordinated assault. Morrison's hunting background had taught him that successful predators understood how to use terrain and timing rather than relying on superior strength or numbers alone. Morrison's 3-hour stand in that forgotten valley would never appear in official army histories or tactical manuals. The kid from Kansas, who violated every approved procedure, had proven that battlefield innovation could triumph over institutional doctrine when individual initiative met desperate necessity. His unauthorized tactics had bought precious time for American forces while demonstrating that sometimes breaking the rules saves more lives than following them ever could.